Hey, listeners, it's AZ. Welcome to episode 49 of the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. And today I sat down with my ISSN friend, Dr. Andrew Jagim, who is the Director of Sports Medicine Research for the Mayo Clinic Health Systems in La Crosse, Wisconsin, as well as his colleague, athletic trainer Joel Luedke. The three of us talked about their firefighter research. We talked about wellness programming for fire departments. And then we finished on AJ's ISSN position stand on energy drinks and shots. I hope you enjoy the episode. It was a fun conversation and my very first one with two guests. Enjoy. Thank you for joining me on the Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, AZ. I find the research and resources and then provide the fire service with the so what, now what, to ensure the health and well-being of every member of our profession. Together, let's thrive. Hello, Fire Rescue Wellness Podcast listeners. It's AZ back for another episode, and today is an epic event. I have two guests at the same time. I'm going to give each of them a chance to introduce themselves and just give us the wave top. So, Dr. AJ, let's start with you. Say hello to the podcast listeners.
All right. Hello, listeners. You want me to get into position details and all that?
Yeah. Tell us about yourself.
Yep. So my name is Andrew Jagim. I work for the Sports Medicine Department in Mayo Clinic Health System. My official title is Director of Sports Medicine Research. And then I kind of come from more of a background in academic type settings. So I've worked for a couple different universities, teaching and doing research. And then I have training in exercise physiology and sport nutrition are kind of my primary areas of interest. And that's kind of a lot of the types of research that I do. And then just kind of applying it to different populations, hence kind of why we're on the podcast chatting today.
Application, my favorite. And Joel, I'm going to give you a chance to introduce yourself, but wait, first, here's the backstory. I can't nail it down to either 2016 or 2018. It was one of those 2 years at ISSN. I met AJ at the conference, and I was there. It was probably 16 because I didn't know anybody yet. And so I was really nervous, and I went out to this little tiki hut bar. And here was a super nice professor. We struck up a conversation, and then, 5, 6, whatever years later, we reconnected at NSCA Great Lakes last year. And now we're collaborating on research. How cool is that?
Mm-hmm. Good old tiki bar, bringing people together.
The tiki bar. I know. Conferences are hard for introverts. They're hard. All right. So, Joel, tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and then the work you do with AJ.
Yeah, so my name's Joel Luedke. I'm an athletic trainer by education. Also work at Mayo Clinic Health System. This is my second year being this. Previous to that, I've spent my entire career in the collegiate setting, both at D1 and D3, working with a variety of sports. Really worked with AJ both at a previous institution we were both at, and then obviously connected again at the health system, and really kind of a long and winding story how we got worked in with the firefighters, but it's been basically 3 years coming, and then we finally got the green light officially to do it after we had done some kind of research, in quotes, if you will, just to make sure that everything was above board. And so that's why we've been doing that. We work out of the same hallway, so it's constant up and down the hallway. Hey, I got this idea, I got that idea. And then obviously with the more connections, I'm in connecting with you, and here we go.
Here we go. And it's interesting, and we're going to circle back because I think both of you need to present either together or individually at the PSATS conference next year, because I think that would be a huge opportunity for their listeners. But Joel, I hear why and how you kind of got into fire, but it's unclear to me, AJ, how did you get into researching in fire?
A lot of it was, kind of as Joel got more ingrained with the local fire department here and kind of taking over a lot of their, fitness programming, my wheels started instantly turning and going, geez, I bet we could do some interesting research projects with a lot of that. And a lot of the types of research that we do and have done previously at University of Wisconsin-La Crosse, a lot of them are very kind of applied and where we're somewhat double dipping on things that we're normally doing. We just kind of frame it more of a research project so that we can kind of benefit from the research side of it by kind of expanding our knowledge, but then B, the athletes or the tactical populations also get that benefit of learning some important information about their fitness state, programming, nutrition, you kind of name it. So it's kind of a two birds, one stone type of situation. And I've always, kind of just been crafty about taking advantage of opportunities like that. And so I would say we're still kind of new to this, space in terms of researching the firefighter population, but it's really already been rewarding in terms of helping, serve those that serve others, and you make them healthier and more fit. Everyone in the community wins. And so it's instantly kind of been a gratifying group to work with from a research capacity.
Well, and we certainly appreciate it. And I'm going to go off topic for just a second, but not too far. But my guest this week was Dr. Mark Abel. And I mentioned to him, I'm so glad I brought this up because he straightened me out. I never thought of it this way, but I mentioned to him that when I started the fire service, it seemed like they weren't really willing to listen to research. For example, even firefighting tactics, I would look at it and I would think, the physics, that doesn't click. That's not right. But I didn't say anything, of course. And what Mark said was that it was the same way in collegiate athletics 20 years ago. So yeah, so I'm so glad that you're doing the research, and I'm so glad that fire departments are listening. Huge thumbs up on that. So popping this question to you, Joel, what specifically created your interest in working with tactical populations, specifically fire?
So we have been very fortunate. Our partners from the fire department side, particularly Captain Adam Markert, who leads their kind of fitness committee and has been driving this forward even before we met him, has been all in on this and totally willing and figuring it out. And so just having that excitement from that side has been a huge benefit. But knowing that it had becoming a bigger thing in both athletic training and the strength and conditioning realm, and as AJ mentioned, just working with that population that the direct impact that you're going to have on them is going to have a much bigger impact on the larger community. We've joked, but also not really. Like, I'm 6'3", 275 pounds. There's not a lot of people that can drag me around. So knowing that I'm helping the people that are going to have to help me in those situations is also kind of a peace of mind thing. But yeah, that was kind of the big interest in it, just something new and different and really highly impactful. And a lot of the stuff we had been doing at UW-La Crosse in terms of programming, we thought could transfer over really well, focusing on training versus just working out, building in mobility and kind of accessory work right into the program to make it efficient, to make it so they can get it done in a time where it's not a lift and then a 15-minute stretching session and all of that. And I think the ones that have really kind of bought into it have really been seeing the benefits of that. And then just to kind of what AJ was saying from the research, we're able to use data on all of this and see things. We've got another round of testing, coming up in spring of 23 that we'll be able to see, are we making impacts? Are we not? What could we change and do? And through the use of the research side of it, it's that two birds, one stone exactly, where we're able to put out more research, but we're also able to apply it directly to them and say, this is what we think's working, here's what we'd like to change, and here's where we're going to go from there.
You mentioned that you were a big guy. I did not realize that you were 6'3", you said 270?
Yeah, apparently I hide it well.
I did not realize that. It's really interesting. I'm in a pretty small department, and although a couple of these people have moved on, at one time we had enough people like 6'5" and above to field two sides of a basketball team. Like, we had 10 just monsters. So if you ever decide you want to get in the fire service, we'll take you at our department. We need to replace a couple people on the basketball team. So keep that in mind.
It is definitely off my mind.
Yeah, keep it in mind. Okay, so I forgot to mention, I was so excited. AJ and Joel had allowed me to present some of the research that they did recently at the Society for Neurosports event, and humble brag, I got second place. I was very excited. But that Data Blitz was based on their air management course research. And so, Dr. J, what question were you trying to answer specifically when you started that research project?
One of the first things that we realized after talking with the local department here and that they would kind of go through this annual air management course, I was kind of, as I learned about it, I was like, well, how do you determine if you're improving from one year to the next? And they didn't really have a good answer to it. And I could tell, I was like, well, that's an obvious thing that we could probably help you out with, of trying to quantify how they're performing on that test from one year to the next. Again, are they improving, on an individual level, but then also across the department? Is everyone kind of moving in the right direction? And so we kind of started looking, and I even remember asking you, like, how many other departments do these types of air management courses? And we're kind of getting different answers, and it was pretty clear that every department can kind of do this their own way. And some do it annually, some don't. Each course is even different in terms of how they're set up. And so we were trying to find a way where we could develop some type of composite score or formula where you could kind of collect some pretty low-hanging fruit metrics or variables during this test, kind of put it together in this equation, and then it would pump out, again, some kind of singular value or composite score that you could then characterize how well they performed on that test. And so we actually saw a similar paper, and they kind of did a similar type of formula, but they had what we call like a fixed endpoint. So it was, you have X amount of work, just do it as fast as you can. Whereas the current department, they do it more open-ended, where you just kind of cycle through as many times as you can until you run out of air and hit that limit. And so we modified their formula and created what we call like work efficiency. So how efficient can you kind of get X amount of work done on whatever your starting air level was on those tanks. And so that was kind of the outcome that we came up with. And then also just collecting some other kind of descriptive information in terms of how physiologically demanding it was. What was their heart rate? What was their average speed? We used a polar monitoring system that has some proprietary metrics of like cardio load and TRIMP scores. And so we kind of put all that in that recent paper that we published to just kind of highlight, for the course that these guys do every year, this was the typical kind of physiological response. And then we put that formula in there so that other departments could also really use that equation to quantify work efficiency if they wanted to.
And I think I remember in that same conversation that we had a year ago, kind of expressing my frustration because we call it consumption courses, but no one's ever been able to explain to me, is it better to do more rounds? Is it better to last longer? Well, what am I looking for? So this sort of work efficiency is key, I think, to help the employees. And you mentioned a word I think that maybe the listeners might not be familiar with. Can you just go into a little bit what a TRIMP score is?
So TRIMP is an abbreviation for training impulse. And so there's a couple different formulas in the literature that are used to kind of get to the same end result. But what it allows you to do is kind of create an accumulating metric or value during a practice or a workout or an air management course like this, where depending on where your heart rate is at, usually using like a 5-zone type of spectrum, heart rate zone 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, with 5 kind of being 90% of your max heart rate and above. So the way this training impulse is then calculated is based on the amount of time you're spending in these different heart rate zones, and then it just accumulates in value either the longer you're in those zones or the higher in each of those zones that you're working at, or in terms of like an intensity of effort. And so a higher TRIMP value means you spent a lot of time, working at a higher heart rate, or a short amount of time working at a really high heart rate. Both of those would be ways to kind of bump up like a TRIMP score. And so it's a pretty common metric used in more like sports science type settings where they want to characterize like the internal load or strain of a practice or a weekly training, cycle where they have this kind of, a singular value that can characterize the internal strain or physiological response during a bout of activity.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense, and I know the listeners appreciate that. So, Joel, you're up. Can you walk the listeners through the air management course that you came up with or that you had modified from the department that you were working with? Can you just walk them through the steps?
Yeah, so for the air management course, it's something that they've done previously, as Dr. Jagim had referenced. So ultimately for them, it's at a training facility in town. They do a 100-foot charged hose line drag, a body drag. They then go up 3 flights of stairs, I believe, with a 30-pound, that might be wrong, hose thrown over their, thrown on their back. And then as they get to the top, they have to put on a valve, take off a valve, just showing that concentration. Then they come back down, elevate a ladder, and then they go and hit a Kaiser sled 20 times. There's no requirement on moving it a certain distance, but they just hit it. Then they can take, a short break if they want to. And then they go around to the second part of the course, enter in, go up to the second floor, perform a left-hand search. They end up having to climb over what would be basically crawling through an attic, I equate it to. Then a mini version of their obstacle course where you have to lay down flat, rotate to your side, kind of get through a wire maze. You come back around, have to pull a hose up from outside the building, up a flight via rope, and you come back down. And then they do about a 200-meter recovery walk. Again, there's no set time on that, and that's just repeated until they get to 200 PSI, which at that point they then get into a recovery position and try and make that last as long as possible before the time runs out. So we were basically recording PSI kind of at the end of each of those individual tasks, plus how much time it took to do that. Every time they went in and out, we recorded that time. And then to what you ended up presenting during that recovery walk, we actually used part of the standard assessment of concussion test, a repeat concentration exercise of numbers. So you have to, if I gave you 911, you would have to say 119 back. And we did a string of 4. If they failed that, we asked them 3. If they failed that, we just marked it. And that's what we were just seeing, if there was any change or win during the course. They happened to maybe struggle with that if they did at all. And that actually came out of, I did the air management course so I could experience it. And the captain we were working with asked me a simple math question, and I said the wrong number and knew it instantly after I said it. But he's like, that's, some of the stuff that some people are interested in. I'm like, how hard you're working in that concentration. And so this was our initial run at it, which we're going to repeat again this May, but we're also probably going to add another concentration variable to it to just make it a little tougher to see if just what we were giving was too easy. But we'll obviously repeat that to make sure to see if that was the case as well.
Okay, but don't keep the secret. What was the result with the concentration part of the test?
Nothing significant that we saw. There was definitely some failure with it, but nothing like significant from lap to lap. It seemed like, just kind of looking at it, if you were to look at the numbers, the first section they did fine. Lap 1 they did pretty good, but for whatever reason, lap 2 seemed to jump up as they were just getting into steady state. Again, nothing is significantly different. So we'll see if that holds true again for this year, and then also just upping the difficulty of the concentration aspect to see if that has an impact.
Okay, so here's a plot twist for you before I turn it back over to AJ. How about either psychomotor vigilance test or Stroop test?
We haven't officially said it yet, so we're open to...
Maybe we throw that into the creatine study, Joel.
Oh, I love that you guys are studying creatine. Okay, but before I go too far off the rails...
Firefighters too, AZ, so make sure you let Scott Forbes know. He'll be excited about that one.
I know, and Drew Gonzalez down at Texas A&M is taking a look at some creatine in firefighters too, so it's very exciting.
Oh, cool.
I'm so excited. Okay. All right. A million episodes ago, I had Dr. J. Dawes on, and I asked him a similar question, but I think that this deserves repeating because people need to understand it. Kind of the terms reliable and valid and validated. So listeners, just hear this again. When I was doing my consumption test, there was no consistency from year to year how it was set up. There was sometimes not even consistency from day to day how it was set up. And then one time somebody hit the Kaiser sled too hard and broke the little rubberized mallet. And so we substituted 10 strikes with a sledgehammer on a tire, which is nowhere near as hard as moving the Kaiser sled because our requirement is to move it across however many strikes it takes. And so there was no way to compare year to year, person to person. There's just to me, I was always like, why are we doing this? But AJ, can you speak to what reliable means, valid and validated if you want to dig to that?
Yep. So anytime we're using tests or procedures in a research setting, a reliability or a reliable test would be one where it's going to give you consistent values if you do repeat assessment. So if we were to do 5 tests, we would get 5 similar results, assuming everything was done, the exact same way. So that would indicate that test or piece of equipment has a high degree of reliability, so you can get consistent values from it. Whereas validity indicates kind of how accurately something is assessing what it's supposed to assess. So again, if we want to measure strength, it would make sense to use a 1 rep max type test because that's usually regarded as a valid way to assess lower body strength. We wouldn't do something like push-ups to failure to measure absolute strength because that's a better test for muscular endurance. And so you want to always select, again, a valid test that's giving you information accurately about what you want it to measure. And so the other word that you threw out there was validated. And so oftentimes, especially with some of the things we're doing with firefighters, we're using more field-based assessment strategies because it's really hard to bring them into a controlled lab environment, especially when they're on shift. It's just not really feasible. So we have to bring a lot of our toys to them. And so we oftentimes look for, validation studies that have, looked at more mobile or portable pieces of equipment and then compare them against some kind of criterion or reference method. And that would be a way to validate, some of these field-based tests or portable pieces of equipment to, again, make sure it's giving you the information that you want, even though it's known that it's not regarded as like the gold standard. But, if it, again, is validated, then it still seems to give you the right information. So we've done some of these studies already with some of the toys that we use and will use in the future to making sure that, again, we're getting the right information that we would want when we test them.
I love it. All right, Joel, bouncing it to you. Are you ready? All right, he's ready. What services are you currently providing to the fire department? Or what services are you hoping to provide in the future to the fire department that you're working with specifically?
Yeah, so right now we're doing a lot of fitness program writing for them and providing that. The department we work with is on a 48-96 schedule. And so that makes programming interesting. And having listened to your episode with Dr. Abel, everything he was saying, it was echoing and clicking and, agreed. And so we've already kind of modified, understanding that. But so we provide that as an option to them with any modifications that people need with injury history or other concerns. But within that, we did not required, but I think we ended up having like 86 of a 100-person department participate in a Fusionetics movement screen, which is based off the NASM corrective exercise specialist. But the reason that we went and utilized Fusionetics, because it's app-based, they've done all the work on the back end with the algorithm that after we did the screen, we could generate a custom to that person program to address some mobility issues or some stability issues, that they can have access right on their phone. And so we actually have them include that right in their warm-up if they would like to, but also scheduled it so they have an option 7 days a week. So no matter if they're on shift or off shift, there's something there for them if they'd like to. Beyond that, we're very much still in like the pilot mode of this and trying to expand it. So every Wednesday and Friday morning, part of my day is going to each of the 4 stations we have in town and just basically popping in, answering questions, clearing up confusion. We record all the workouts and put it into a short video that they can then play in real time to just help them get through it, because a lot of them will admit, like, I'm not the fitness person, I don't get this. So the more they can see it in real time, we've adapted to do that for them, which has gone over really well. But then now, just with my AT background and working in our sports med clinic, a few of them, aches and pains are starting to be brought up that I can send them some home exercise stuff with, or actually have them come into clinic, get seen by a sports med doc who's just got that mindset of, you're treating them like an athlete. They're, that we're not going to tell you got to be down for 8 weeks just because, or you got to take 2 weeks off, and really working with them to, just answer questions. And if there's things that we can do to help in clinic, we'll do those. So that's been really nice. And then another just kind of aside with Dr. Jagim and the lab we have in the hallway with a metabolic cart and a DEXA scanner, we had an ongoing study just collecting some body composition numbers and then also resting metabolic rate, which has been eye-opening for I think we've had 28 or so come out and do that, and probably have some more coming. But then we just recorded yesterday, and by we, I mean Dr. Jagim, did most of the work on this. I sat there and asked some questions, but just some basic nutrition stuff, how to make sense of it, how to read it. If this is your baseline level of caloric need, what do we multiply that by in order to make sure that we're meeting your needs but not overshooting? And so we'll get that out to the department probably next week and hopefully answer a lot of questions with that, but then hope maybe inspire a few more to come in. And I think we're hoping to even write that up because of the number that we're interested, that we could put that information out there on just a different population.
And I didn't intend to ask you this question, but it popped in my mind because I'm sure the listeners are going to want to know. Do you have any data yet on return on investment?
We don't. We've tried to figure out what that would be. When we initially started this, the initial meeting 3 years ago, our OC Health group was potentially going to get involved because they had been doing their physicals. And so we all met and they did some run loss data on workers' comp. And we didn't, based on the numbers, apparently nobody got hurt in the years that they were looking at, because I think the highest year was like $80,000 or something. So it was not a huge amount of money. And as much as I would love to say that I could prevent all injuries from occurring, it takes one bad step in a surgery to hit $80,000 in that. So that's not one that we've really looked at, but I have, and I had the captain we've been working with, and I think he actually shared it with the chief. Your episode, I'm blanking on her name.
Moshe.
Moshe, yeah, yes. That episode to just kind of highlight that potential return on investment as well. And then I actually know another person that came out of that Indiana State program that had done some work with tactical departments, and they were focusing more on satisfaction. And so we've got a couple of just like brief surveys of just trying to get some of that data back. Like, hey, this is great. Like, it's awesome you're coming through, which we've generally gotten that feedback. It's been interesting to see some of the walls come down as we just continued to show up, basically. Just this morning, I talked to a captain who has not said a word to me since I started coming around, but had some elbow pain, had some questions. We had a great conversation. I got to send him some stuff here this afternoon, but you can just see that it's starting to come through 80 plus people, 85% of the department doing this testing with us. And we know we'll get a ton for the air management course. It's been pretty awesome. We had 28, now 27 because someone got hurt. Sorry, AJ, I forgot to tell you that. For this creatine study, instantly I was like, yep, we're in on that. Is pretty awesome.
Oh, that's outstanding. And my biggest thing with the creatine studies is that at least the ones that I was looking at, they want you to not be taking it for at least 12 weeks. Well, sorry. Not going to go off for 12 weeks. Okay, well, that's outstanding. And actually, I will link that episode with Maura Shea because she does such an elegant job calculating her return on investment. And she's also so very conservative, and her numbers are out of this world. So I'll link that episode.
And
all right.
The other thing, too, to piggyback off that, once we do this next round of testing, we'll have a lot of the results from like more of a fitness standpoint to kind of demonstrate, hopefully that return on investment, saying, hey, after a year of doing this, hopefully you're stronger, you're more fit, you're moving in the right direction. And so I know that doesn't immediately translate to monetary return on investment, but from just a fitness and wellness return on investment, hopefully we can bring that back to them and say, see, here's some of the value that we can offer. You're getting more fit. I would assume that also will translate to improvements in more of the kind of health and clinical metrics as well.
And I keep telling departments, even in a corporate wellness program, they're getting 3 to 1 to 6 to 1 in just a corporate wellness program. And so you can pretty much guess you're probably going to get that. But why not think of it as just doing the right thing? You're doing the right thing for your employees. We know that they're dying of cardiovascular disease, cancer, suicide, and motor vehicle accidents. And we know that education and intervention can help with all those things. So let's do the right thing. So
absolutely.
Okay. Taking a big left turn. Back to you, AJ. You
I know where this is going.
recently published a 72-page position stand on energy drinks and energy shots, along with some of the brightest and best in the ISSN. My hat's off to you. That was a wonderful publication. First of all, I'm just going to ask you for the listeners. I did summarize it on my Instagram, but I think I have listeners that aren't on Instagram. Can you just take kind of some of the wave tops that you found on the energy drinks and energy shots research that you went through?
Yep. And so this was kind of a follow-up or a part 2, if you will, from Dr. Bill Campbell, who had done the first position stand back in 2013 on energy drinks and shots. And so obviously throughout that 10-year period, there's been a lot more research that has come out on, both of those specific types of beverages. And I kind of asked, and went through the channels of getting approval to write this updated one. And I actually prefaced it about a year or two ago with another study where we actually just first pulled all these nutrition facts labels from like the top selling energy drinks to really just define what an energy drink and energy shot was. And so I kind of set up that first paper then to follow it with this position stand, because that was really missing in the literature. There wasn't really a well-defined what's an energy drink, what's an energy shot, what's in them. And so we just did a simple kind of descriptive study saying out of the top selling drinks and shots, here's what's commonly in them, here's the top ingredients, here's the average caffeine amount. And so that allows us to, when we kind of went back to the literature, really better define or better include studies that would kind of, or should be included in this kind of position stand, because the original one was a little bit more vague, and some of them I'd probably call more of a pre-workout beverage or, thermogenic type of product that was sometimes getting lumped into the energy drink category. And so we just kind of better defined our parameters of what a drink is, what a drink isn't. And so when we went back through the literature, then we could really identify the studies that have looked at the acute performance effects, the longer term implications, which there's not really a lot of those studies out there that have looked at long term, training adaptations or even health changes with regular consumption of energy drinks. And so, but there's still hundreds of studies that were included in this position stand in this review. And similar to like the caffeine position stand, there are a lot of kind of acute benefits of consuming energy drinks from like a performance standpoint, just mostly because of the caffeine in it. Anytime you give people enough caffeine prior to exercise, you typically see some kind of improvement, whether it's time to exhaustion, reps to failure, improved power output, et cetera. And so we have several tables that kind of outline all of those studies that kind of demonstrate some of those acute performance benefits. And again, we linked it back to Nancy Guest's position stand with the caffeine one, because she really laid out a lot of that literature and kind of specific recommendations from like a dosing standpoint of what that caffeine amount needs to be. And then again, getting into more of the longer term studies, we really highlighted that there's a big need for those studies where they look at kind of in a clinical trial design, what happens or what changes over time if people regularly consume these daily. How does that impact long-term training adaptations? Certainly, how does it impact health and some of those clinical measures? So we kind of highlighted the need for more of that work, and then did kind of circle back to more of the safety considerations, because those drinks are always in the spotlight for some of their health risks and safety concerns. And so we just kind of highlighted, the different individuals or populations that probably shouldn't be consuming energy drinks. A lot of them are kind of in alignment with like the FDA and US, DA guidelines of, no children, no kids, pregnant women, individuals with comorbidities, cardiovascular risk factors, again, probably shouldn't be consuming those kinds of beverages, mostly just because we don't know if they're definitively safe or not. So usually you kind of err on the side of caution. And then again, highlighted, the need for some more research, because the other thing we commented on is these products have changed a lot from when they first came out. We talked about how Red Bull, being one of the first energy drinks, first had like 60, 90 milligrams of caffeine in it. And now we have, beverages like this one with some
J.
of the bigger ones where they have 300 milligrams of caffeine per serving, and they're just a bigger volume size. And so it's, again, important to kind of repeat some of these studies, because these beverages have changed a lot historically, and they're used much more frequently by athletes and non-athletes. And so I think we're going to see a lot more research in this space moving forward from both a clinical health, but then also kind of the performance side of it.
And this research may have not met your inclusion criteria, probably because most of it's in mice, but Dr. Allison Brager, sleep neuroscientist, loves to talk about energy drinks and the danger, the neurotoxicity of them to the brain. And then she also cites a couple studies in military where they found that excessive energy drinks caused aggression, PTSD, depression, all of those things. So I think when you revise the position stand in a few years, there might be even more to include. You see how I did that? When you revise the position stand? He already told me he's never doing it again.
Yeah.
Also, Joey, not it. I do not want to do it either.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for hitting those wave tops on that. And also, just as a quick side note too, the ISSN has a position stand on tactical athlete fueling. And so if you haven't read that, I will also link that in the show notes, because it's a really interesting read. All right. Joel, coming back to you. Another plot twist. What do you see as the future best practices of providing health and wellness services to fire departments, either as an AT or a strength coach or another health and wellness professional?
I mean, to echo a lot of everything you said, it's essential. That's something that the chief that we work with, he agrees with it. He's just figuring out funding as everybody deals with. Even coming from different health system ones, like depending on the health system, funding can always be a problem. But whoever you can get, we reached out to, blanking on her name too, the strength and conditioning coach in Pflugerville, to get her memoir.
Oh, Vanessa,
Yes.
Frost Piedrita.
That document, if you're in the strength and conditioning world or AT world, is unbelievable. A huge treasure trove of knowledge. Check it out. We wanted to look at it just to see what they're doing compared to what we were, get ideas, and it satisfied all that and then some. So it's really helping us lay out the framework. So anybody within that, being an athletic trainer by education and then kind of picking up the strength and conditioning in grad school and evolving it from there, it's a really powerful tool because I think you can be that dual threat. You can really look at injury risk reduction. You can focus on the performance side of it. As Mo had mentioned in hers, just seeing individuals and working on aches and pains. Like, I've thrown that idea out to our local one. They're like, that would be amazing. Like, that is something that started happening, but just to be able to do it on a consistent basis. And then just having good friends and colleagues like AJ, who brings that whole nutrition side, and then obviously his knowledge in strength and conditioning as well. Like, it's just such a perfect team for it. And then our team physician, our department chair here is just in all support and wants to do whatever he can too. So the more you can find that little team, especially in a sports med related context, so powerful because it can take that mindset of treating athletes and putting it to the tactical athlete population.
And I think I've probably said this a million times, but there's so much power in having a professional, an AT or a PT, just take a quick look at your ankle and say, you're okay. It's just an ouchie. Sure. It's not an injury. Smack you on the butt, get back in the game. There's so much power in that. So, all right, back to you, AJ. What do you see in addition to the creatine research? Very excited about that. What do you see as the future direction of research in your lab with specifically in fire?
Yeah, so as Joel held up there, one of the projects that we're hoping to get funded here in the near future is to utilize Oura rings with this population so that you can kind of continually track just a lot of information. I think the biggest thing that we're focused on is heart rate variability, so their HRV values, and then how their chaotic sleep schedules influence kind of their autonomic nervous system. And I would suspect that's kind of a big culprit for a lot of their stress levels and risk factors for all kinds of different, diseases and comorbidities. Just because of the nature of the job, it's hard to correct it. It's just kind of what you sign up for. But we can kind of better understand how some of those disruptions to the sleep cycles, sleep schedules, again, will influence both physical and subjective measures of kind of recovery and readiness. And then that will allow us to kind of, identify some potential countermeasures to that or interventions. Are there things that we can do from a supplement standpoint, from a nutrition standpoint, from more of like a mindfulness or kind of meditative standpoint, and kind of taking a holistic approach of just how can we improve their kind of recovery, their stress levels, and then how can that complement some of the stuff that, Joel's doing from more of like a fitness programming standpoint. And the other thing too that we've just been discussing recently is like kind of taking the sport nutrition model and applying it to, again, this tactical population, because there's not a lot known in terms of the specific kind of energy and macronutrient requirements of this population. And I don't know if we ever will, because it is so varied department, even within a department. We have some that are 21 years old and some that are in their 50s. And so just their physical statures, their activity levels, kind of all over the spectrum. And so it might be challenging to come up with kind of what those specific recommendations are, but that's hopefully something that we can work on and kind of better, just again, mimic what's done with kind of more team sport athletes and better refine some of those nutritional recommendations to optimize their kind of performance abilities when they're on call, or manage any of the health conditions that may be of concern within that group as well. So those are some of the things that are kind of on our radar and we're hoping to tackle here in the near future.
And listeners, never have I ever wished that I was recording video on my podcast, but I had two show and tells show up today. One was Joel holding up his Oura ring, and the other one was AJ holding up his energy drink. So folks, I'm going to ask you to hold up your show and tell again so I can take a screenshot. There's the ring. Okay, there's no AJ.
Oh,
cheater.
Fine.
Okay, here we go. All right, you can put your show and tell down. All right. So we're winding down here, and here's the part of the podcast where I say, did I miss any big topics that you were hoping to talk about, or do you have a final thought? So I'm going to start with you, Joel. What did I miss, or do you have a final thought for the listeners?
I don't think you missed anything. Final thought is, we're new into this, and we've loved listening to just all the guests that you've had. We're definitely going to try and connect with Dr. Abels with the UWL connection. Both AJ having gone to school there and worked there, and me having worked there. But just whatever people are up for, or if there's other firefighters that are interested in anything, to collaborate, find creative ways to get more things, get more resources. That's one thing we love looking at grants for. If we can feed more resources in, as part of a study, but then we just have whatever that is left over, we're all for it, and would love to connect with anyone, and appreciate everything that you do in connecting all these worlds together and making sure that it's getting out there. So just as a final thought, thank you for doing that and letting us be a part of it.
Well, and I'm getting the impression that you may be one of my best listeners, because you quoted, 3-4 podcasts, though. Thank you.
I don't miss many. I have a good commute, so I have a lot of podcast time, so it's worked out well.
Right, and I'm not trying to be Joe Rogan, so it's not going to take you 6 commutes to listen to an episode.
That is fair.
All right. Oh, and also make sure when the Dr. Abel has that survey going out with 2,500 firefighters, so make sure and share that with your local departments.
Yep.
All right. AJ, in addition to the fact that I forgot to mention this, we are co-presenting at ISSN this year. Who knew it would ever happen? We're going to present kind of the theory and practice of research. How do you put it into application? That's going to be at ISSN June 2023. So come see us present on firefighting. But final thoughts for the listeners today, AJ?
My final thought is actually more of a question kind of for you. We've kind of talked about this offline a bit of how it's taken a bit for the fire service to kind of accept, some of this outside help and support. And I know kind of when we talk about tactical military gets thrown into this kind of conversation a lot, but I feel like they've made some big strides in the last even 5 years of kind of investing in the H2F programs and kind of acknowledging that, yeah, we're going to allocate more resources to fitness, nutrition, strength conditioning. And so I feel like they're slowly moving. It always takes military a while to kind of do some of those things and change them. I'm wondering, what do you think is the timeline for the fire service to kind of follow that lead and say, yeah, we're going to take this serious. We're actually going to start investing, whether it's federal, state, city level, what it's going to take, and, when do you see that coming?
Well, I'm going to say 8 years, because 2 years ago I said 10 years. I said within a decade, every department of at least 100, and I think it should be 50, but I said 100. Every department of at least 100 will have an embedded civilian, either strength and conditioning, AT, PT, whatever, health and wellness professional. And I myself am not an early adopter. I just got an iPhone 12, and before that I think I had a 9, okay? And before that, I think I had a 6. So I'm not standing in line for the newest iPhone. I am not an early adopter. But what I tell fire departments, the first one I ever contracted with, I said, you need to be an early adopter. You can't wait to watch someone else do this, or you're going to be another 5 years behind. And I think Moshe says, you're already not an early adopter now. You're a late adopter, so you just got to get on the train. So I would say within 8 years. And I think what it's going to take is just seeing other departments do it. And then it's going to grow like wildfire. Interestingly enough.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, I like the fire jokes. Interestingly enough, I am not an Instagram, I'm not an influencer by any means, but I do try to get the word out there. And you know what my most popular posts are? You're going to die. It's the research summaries. It's where I take a paper and put it in 8 to 10 slides, and I usually get 100 people liking those, whereas I can put up anything else and I might get 2 likes. So I think the time is coming, and it's not as long as we thought it was going to be. So 8 years, you heard it here.
Do you think those civilians will be kind of solely dedicated to more fire service, or do you think cities or communities are going to have to kind of roll it into police, fire, even other types of city workers to kind of better justify the costs or the resources that are going to be needed for that?
I think it's going to depend entirely upon the governmental model. For example, I'm a fire protection district, and so we're the king of our own kingdom. We're a self-taxing body. And so in order to share the cost of that resource, it's an arrangement we would have to somehow make with probably another fire protection district. But in villages, there's no reason why someone can't be in charge of police, fire, public works, library workers, all of it. There's no reason. In Illinois, we have something called the mutual aid box alarm system. They are intergovernmental agreements saying if we have a fire in our town, you're going to automatically come. Like, we're just going to dispatch you and you're going to come. It's, again, mutual aid box alarm. And there's, I don't know how many departments on each MABUS division, but I've always said it would make a lot of sense to simply start with one person per MABUS division and divide the cost amongst the departments and get started that way. So I don't know if they have those similar things in every state, but I would guess they do. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
More questions than answers today, unfortunately. All right, well, I always try to be really respectful of everyone's time, and so it has been my honor to have both of you. It sounds like I'm going to actually, well, by the time the listeners hear this, it'll be long past, but it sounds like I'm going to see you in person tomorrow, AJ. So that'll be fun at NSC at Great Lakes. And I guess with that, we'll drop the mic, and AZ, AJ, and Joel are officially out.